wanted to acknowledge Tammy on here because she is absolute whiz at PowerPoint and a lot about making pretty images. I wanted to do a module on the monad because I thought it was basically really timely since we are going through Starburst reset that is a very high level monadic reset process. And the monad is the aspect of our multidimensional self that holds our direct connection to source. The monad is in lots of different places in our anatomy, but wherever it is it's at the center of that particular structure. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different locations for the monad. It holds our capacity to manifest and our capacity for two-way communication between us and source, and our capacity to regain eternal life. And I'd just like to remind you, in terms of thinking about reality as formed by the flow of consciousness through a template that is also made of consciousness. So you can essentially think of consciousness kind of splitting itself up in two ways. In one sense as a crystallized template that holds the form and the blueprint for manifestation, and also as the consciousness that flows through it, that beams through it, and that brings that manifestation template to life. The seed atom is the core template, and the monad is the flames that activate and bring that template to life. But they're really just two aspects of the essence. Now, I'm not used to holding a mic, so if I start to, wave around or hold it too far away, give me a heads up. Going to the next one. I just wanted you to have a quick look at where I pulled information from for this. We started out with tangible structure of the soul. Evolutionary Path of Human Consciousness, the Templar Manual was very helpful, the Egypt lectures, Awakening the Flame of Orion, the Dance for Love, especially the workshop that was in Greece 2002, and the Dance for Life, Dance for Love. I have a whole other page of these, so you can go to the next one. I listened to a lot of workshops. The Forbidden Testaments of Revelation, the Cosmic Clock. And so Dublin 2003, and then you'll also see Dublin November 2003. The Resetting the Cosmic Clock, Cathara 2-3 Foundations, and the Michael Merriweather Workshop, and all the way up to Phoenix in March of this year. So we're going to cover a lot of ground. And one thing that you're going to notice a bunch as we go through this is that there are lots of aspects of this creation that are pretty paradoxical. And I think that's probably because we're looking at it from a limited three-dimensional perspective. And when you're looking at it probably from a multi-dimensional perspective, it will not seem so paradoxical. But there's lots of places where what is inside and what's outside, what's big and what's small, are going to be placed in a way that seems like the opposite to the way that makes sense to you. So we're going to actually start with that right with the unified, because all creation takes place within the unified field of the unified, which is known as the point of all union, and it is a point. It is a singular point of consciousness within the body of Source. So everything is taking place within a single point, which is pretty strange, but that's the way it is. I didn't make the rules. We're going to talk about stair-step creation a bit.
Terry, can you just up the volume a little bit?
Yeah.
You can, because there's a lot of background noise.
Okay, I'm going to do my best. It weighs about 5 pounds. All right, so we're going to start with the ascended mastery levels of creation and identity. Consciousness at this level is considered ultra-terrestrial. And these are layers of consciousness that are eternal gestalts, that are basically enormous collective consciousness. It's like collective and unified at the same time. And they take the form of concentric spheres. The very first step down from Source itself is called the God seed. And that is an electrotonal gestalt of pure conscious radiation within the Unus I. There are many God seeds, and they're very specific that they're formed in 2 sets of 12 in relation to the cosmic order in which we exist. That implies that there might be a whole other set of creations out there somewhere based on a different pattern, but we're not going to think about those. That first one, I just want to mention that that's also called the Uset level of identity, also the I am this I am. Now our second step is the monad. This is the original monad, the big monad. And these are called the cosmic family gestalt of consciousness. These are created in sets of 12 as well. When we get into some detail about monad, you will see why the pattern of 12. The monad creates within itself a trinity of vibrating light and sound that forms the template, the morphogenetic field, for the energy matrices. It creates sets of 12 energy matrices, and each of those has time matrices inside of them. The energy matrix is a standing field of inaudible sound, one primary resonant tone, that's the part of chi, and 2 secondary tones, the part of tum and the part of k. And these take the form of concentric spherical domains of sound. They're called domains because they are eternal and fixed. They do not change. And consciousness at this level takes the form called the Janus, meaning of the Unus I. The third step down is called the Ekar, or the ecadic level, and this level is known as the Grande Janus. This is the resonant tone, and it's the first individuation from the monad. This is a singular vibration of what's called first cause sound. It's also called the monadic wave. The Ekar then creates 12 riche within itself. This is the polaric level of the energy matrix. This is the overtone and the high vibration. This is called the Vacha Janus, and this is a bipolar vibration. It has 2 core vibrations in it. The next step down is creating what's called geomantic entities. This is the triadic level of the energy matrix, the Ram Janus. This is the bass tone low vibration, and this one is tripolar. It has 3 vibrations within it. So as we're going through these different steps of the energy matrix, we're going farther and farther out from the Unus I, from the central source. Now this is where things start to get a little bit interesting. Each geomantic entity polarizes itself to form a set of 2 15-dimensional time matrices. So each energy matrix has 2 time matrices inside of it. And it starts with a point of frequency that represents the central point of the 15 dimensions. That's going to be the 8th dimension grid. And then it fragments itself outward from that into 2 sets of 7 dimensions. The 7 higher dimensions and the 7 lower dimensions. So these plus the original 8th dimension make the 15 dimensions. The 2 time matrices are interwoven together. So they are separate, but their energy flows into and through each other. And these create the basis for 5 harmonic particle universes and 5 harmonic antiparticle universes. So it's really important that I think we normally think about emphasizing the aspect of the step downs where it's like starting with dimension 12 or dimension 15, consciousness breaks itself down into smaller and smaller and smaller forms, starting with the larger number of dimensions and down into the smaller number of dimensions. But the way the form is actually set starts from the center and spreads itself out. Okay. After the pattern for the 2 time matrices is set, that same geomantic entity that put itself through that 8th dimension and created the whole 15-dimensional pattern then projects parts of its own identity into the dimensional grids of dimensions 13, 14, and 15 to form the light fields. This is the Rishi level of awareness. They're called Brenau Rishi, which means of the light. And the dimension 13 is the most important of these because that holds the blue flame that is the direct connection to the ecadic matrix, which is the first step down from the monad. So it holds the pathway out of the time matrix and out of the energy matrix into the monad and God seed levels. Then the Rishi creates sets of 12 in dimensions 12, 11, and 10, so it creates 12 avatars. Each avatar creates 12 oversouls. Each oversoul creates 12 souls. Each soul creates 12 incarnates. It's a lot of beings. We're going to take a little look at Huva bodies. Huva bodies are 3-dimensional constructs that hold consciousness into one of the harmonic universes. In the time matrix, the Huva bodies are called Ariya Huva bodies, and the ones in the energy matrix are called Useta Huva bodies. And together, they form the 8 Huva bodies that is the monad. So when we're talking about the consciousness of the monad, I want you to appreciate how enormous that is. It holds the entire 8 Huva bodies of that entire structure. And these are the 8 Huva bodies of the monad. We are in the Nada Huva body as incarnates. This is also called the Tauran level, and this is carbon-based biology. The Alphi Huva body is the soul, or Dora, and that is carbon-silica-based biology. The Beta Huva body is the oversoul, or the Tura, that is silica-based biology. Mahara Huva body is the avatar, also called the Dolus. That is crystalline liquid light. Raja Huva body corresponds to the Rishi level, the light fields, and the body form there is a standing wave flame body. And then the Tanotra Huva body, the Di Omni Huva body, and the Prima Huva body are all pure radiation. They are the Huva bodies that are in the energy matrix, and those are really outside of manifestation per se.
Is that the God seed?
No, that's actually below the God seed. There's the God seed, then the monad, and then the energy matrix. So this is just for you to take a look at that whole thing. Let me see. When I was taking a look at this, I was doing a little bit of a calculation, and I don't seem to have it written down here, but I was trying to get a sense of just how enormous a monad actually is in terms of consciousness, and did the calculation that because a monad forms 12 ekar, then 12 rishe, 12 geomantic entities, which each form 2 time matrices, one monad makes 3,456 time matrices. Okay? And if we're considering that, a few levels below that, a single avatar creates 1,728 incarnates in one time matrix. My calculator ran out of memory way before I could get to that. So just say it's like billions of us make up a monad. That's how huge the monad is. So the densest forms, the smallest forms are at the center of this, so we as incarnates are at the center, and then as we expand our identities out, we expand into these larger and larger structures. Now this is the human lineage through all these levels. We do not have a name for the monadic level of the human lineage. And I certainly looked, and it doesn't seem to have been given. But the name for the God seed that the human line is based on, that we originally came out of, is the Melchizedek God seed. The FR level for human lineage is called the Ra Confederacy. The Riche is the Emerald Order. So everybody's going to be really familiar with these different names. Geomantic entity level that creates the time matrices is the Azurite Council. The Rishi level is the Elohai. Our avatar level are the Anahazi. Our oversoul level is the Oraphim. Our soul level is the Turanusium. And the incarnate is the Turanusium too. So that is the pattern that we need to follow as humans in terms of our pathway of ascension out of the time matrix into the monadic and into the God seed levels. We have to retrace that exact lineage. I want you to go back for just a second.
Go back.
Yeah, please.
I tried to hold it.
I just wanted to make a comment about the Melchizedek God seed briefly. Remembering that everything is based on patterns of 12, and that the God seeds also come in sets of 12. And everyone, I hope, will remember that the number 12 out of every single pattern holds the complete blueprint for that pattern and is itself the largest pattern. The Melchizedek God seed holds the number 12 position in its set of God seeds, and it's called a prima God seed for that reason. The Melchizedek God seed is one of the few that has been able to keep what's called the pillar of light, that is the pillar of consciousness that connects every single one of these levels to each other. It's one of the few that's been able to keep that pillar continuous and unbroken through most of its family lines, the lines that come out of the Melchizedek God seed. And because of that, it is called the keeper of the codes, and it has become involved in many, many situations called host matrix transplants, which is essentially a situation where any family line that is having difficulty with its pillar of consciousness can be spliced into the Melchizedek God seed, and by doing that, it's connected with its own original monad in God seed, and also to the larger power of the Melchizedek one to hold that intact. So that can realign the higher levels of the pillar, and that is what Melchizedek voice to ordination is. That's what that does, is it splices everybody into the Melchizedek God seed, regardless of whether or not that is the God seed that your original family of consciousness came out of. It doesn't matter. It's going to help you realign no matter what family you're from. Okay? And humans, as descendants of the Melchizedek God seed, have actually served as host matrix transplant vessels for lots of different interstellar races. Now, okay, this diagram is just a different way to look at what we've seen. And seeing that we've got a 2 Cathara grid system in terms of the manifestation fields, the density fields, the light fields, and the sound fields. And that takes the form of 2 Cathara grids, one for the densities and one for the primal fields, the light and sound fields. So this 2 Cathara grid system, 24 points of consciousness, 2 sets of 12, is the pattern of the monad. And this entire 2 Cathara grid set is a monad. We can also just note here that the Akasha is the capstone code for this construct of consciousness. And the Akasha is the Veka code that essentially opens the gateways into the monadic level. That's partly why the Akasha is so important. Okay, just remembering that the monad is the 8 Huva bodies, and it's also the dimension 8 center point. And you can see this in terms of the Merkaba structure for the time matrix. The way that it works is harmonic universe 1 has 1 Merkaba spiral, and it needs to link with one of the other harmonic universes to complete its Merkaba. So there are 4 of these harmonic universes that only have 1 Merkaba spiral, but the central one, dimensions 8, 9, and 7, 8, and 9, has 2 spirals. That is the center point for the time matrix, and it is the point of entry for all consciousness that manifests into a time matrix, and for everything that is leaving. So even when you are complete with your ascension out of the time matrix, and you can go as consciousness into the energy matrix fields, if you want to leave that system, you have to step back down to the dimension 8 center point to leave this set of systems. So you can't go out through the akadic top part of it. You have to come back into the center point. So everything comes in and leaves through that center point. The dimension 8 point is really important too because it connects with a bunch of other time matrices. So it's a place where there tends to be very, very high security in a time matrix. And if there's problems in a time matrix, that portal, that pathway is heavily guarded to make sure that anything that's in that's having a hard time can't get out to make another place have a hard time. All right, now we're going to start with looking at the details of the way the monad is structured. And the Parnakai is really interesting because it has 2 forms. When it is in its state of division into the particum and the partiké, it takes the form of a resonant tone. So the partikai is the resonant tone, the particum is the bass tone, low tone, the partiké is the overtone, high tone. The resonant tone is right in the middle. But when it's in its flash-off state, and the particum and the partiké have reunited with it, it takes the form of what's called an interdimensional tritone wave. So it actually spans levels. And when I'm looking at this dynamic, because the particum and the partiké are only half the size, the template is only half the size of the partikai, it's like they are automatically dropping down a level in consciousness. They're smaller. They're only half as big as a partikai. So just by flashing on, you are kind of dropping down in frequency, dropping down a level. That starts to set the pattern for the dimensions. And when you're flashing off, it's like you're pulling in, but you're also pulling up. Going up a level, and then you're also pulling in and contracting. Now this is just serving as a reminder to everyone in terms of the stairway to heaven. Here we are. And we're actually going to go off the top of the stairway to heaven. So we're here. This is, and we're going up the stairway. This is our particum universe, our particum light fields. This is our Eka-Veka system, the 4 quadrants, the Veka and the Eka in the center, then moving up to the Akasha level, 4 Akasha and in Akasha A, and 4 Akasha A and in Akasha Aya, right here. And we're going to start to take a look at what happens before we even get to the top of the stairway to heaven. Now, this is a representation of the very beginning of creation. And think of this. Okay, think of this circle that represents source as representing a consciousness that is absolutely eternal and infinite and limitless in every way. There's no end to its consciousness. And that within that limitless, vast body of source, a creation point emerged out of the desire to create. And that represents the very first particle number 1 that is here. The center point of particle number 1 is the unicide. And everything that is manifest is inside of that single point, inside of particle number 1. So we're not only inside the first particle, we're all the way inside the center point of the particle. Then you can say that it's as if Source observed itself, saw itself reflected in that first particle, and it saw its own nature, its own essence, by observing itself in that form, and wanted to create more of them. So the second particle emerged as a consequence of that, and particle number 2 contains not only the desire to create, but the intention to create. And the pattern for all of creation is held within both of these particle in the form of encryption, that is a set of vibrations. And that set of vibrations sets the template, the pattern, and the entire method by which consciousness can enter form. It contains what's called the Christ code. That's the pattern through which consciousness creates. And we start to get a very interesting, unusual dynamic here. What happens is that the particle number 2 is not really created separately from this. Particle number 2 comes out through the center point of particle number 1. Okay? So think of particle number 1 as having 360 degrees of thrust or force or consciousness. And particle number 2 is just like it and has even more because it also has the intention. It also has 360 degrees. So when it pops out through this central point, what it does is the way that it comes out splits particle number 1 into particle and particle. So it's like particle number 1 becomes these two. It takes the place of this bipolar pair. And Partakai 2 takes the position or place of Partakai number 1. And when these rejoin back together and go into the central point, Partakai number 1 flows back into Partakai number 2. When Partakai 2 comes out through the center point of Partakai 1, it leaves behind it a little space or a little void in the body of Source, and Source fills up that void with its own essence. So that the way that you've got it is that Source in its limitlessness is always flowing through into the manifestation, and every time there is an outward phasing, Source is filling up the space that's left behind. So as more and more and more of these units are created, Source is flowing out and flowing out and flowing out, and it's the actual essence of Source that is forming all of these units of consciousness. And there is a two-way flow back and forth between the creation that's inside this point and the eternal and limitless body of Source itself. So it goes back and forth, and it is never disconnected. What also happens is that it's called Manu exchange. That is the Manu force, the Source consciousness itself flows back and forth. It also buffers the reunion of Particum and Particay, because since those are opposite charge, opposite identity, they need to have a Manu flow around them, or they would annihilate each other when they rejoin. They would cancel each other out. So they don't cancel each other out, they recombine together. And that happens via the Manu force. So this whole unit right here is called a triad. And that is basically what's called the first phasor pair. It is the first point of this entire creation. And it's actually eternally happening anew every single instant. Now, there are a whole number of other steps in between the first triad and the monad that I can't tell you about because I don't know them all yet. That information was initially released in Morocco, and it's still really being clarified. So if we're really lucky, we'll hear about it this weekend. Really nice. But I do know that there are steps in there called the dyad, the biad, and the myad, and that the dyad is formed of two of the triads. Next one. So up there in the corner, we've got a representation of that very first triad, the Manu, the Ire, and the Mane. And this is the monad. Now the monad has 4 of these triads, plus it also has one in the center. It's like there's a center point, but it's actually a triad. And these exist at different angles to each other. And so the central consciousness, the force, the energy flows out through this central point and into these. So this is the basic form of the monad wherever we're going to find it. This is the original form of it. And you can see how similar it is to the Ruche pattern. It's almost identical to the Ruche. The Ruche and the monad at this level, I'm not quite sure if they are formed separately or if they're like 2 aspects of a single creation process. But the monad then creates the crystalla and the Christ. So the monad is the consciousness construct that is closest to the very creation of the top level of the stairway to heaven. And the monad first creates the crystalla, and then it creates the Christ. It's the photo generator, so it generates the light, the flames, the consciousness that create the balls of light that are known as radons and also iridons. So the iridons are the cells that go with the crystalla, and the radons are the cells that go with the Christ. But they're all created by the process of the monad. This is the way the ruche gets formed. The way that the ruche occurs is that out of the central point, the 12 and the 6th point are formed simultaneously. The 6 then creates the 9 and the 12 creates the 3. And then each of those polarize and form Mane and Ire cell. These are essentially all Manu equivalent. So even it's a really interesting dynamic, and we're going to see this pattern in a bunch of different places, that this is the usual way that we understand polarization, that a Manu or a Partakai splits itself into Ire and Mane, or Particum and Partakai. But this is also, in a sense, a form of polarization. The 12 and the 6 both hold the entire pattern of the unit of 12, but the 12 is expanding and the 6 is contracting. So I know that Ashana has talked about in some places what's called dominant and recessive charges, and I don't know if that is exactly how you would characterize this, but you might think of it as, in a sense, this is like a Mane Manu, and this is like an Ire Manu. And these also have the opposite, the exact same dynamic, they're opposite to each other. Okay. This is a diagram that we don't see much, but I think is really important. This is called the 7 higher and lower heavens that are formed by the primal 12 domains and the 15 rays of the time matrix. The 12 domains and the 15 rays together form a monad. The 12 domains are the sound and light fields, and the 15 rays are the light fields and the manifestation fields. So already you probably have noticed that the light fields function both as domains and as rays. They're like a transitional kind of state. The light fields are domains in the sense that they are eternal and they're mostly fixed, but they are starting to flash on and off a little bit, like the manifestation realms do. So they're also considered rays. So they're kind of a halfway point. And in the sound and light fields, we have 3 domains and then 3 parallel domains, and they are all inside of density 5, dimension 13. So again, this is a little bit reverse of how we think about it when we're looking at that other diagram where the ecstatic fields are on the outside and the light fields are an inner layer. We can tend to think of it as though the ecstatic fields are bigger, the sound fields are bigger than the light fields, but actually they're smaller. So the closer you get to source, the more you are contracting into a point. And the farther out you get towards manifestation, the larger the template gets, up to this center point, just kind of like the interface between these two. And at that point, you get the reverse. You go farther and farther out in manifestation, and you get smaller and smaller and smaller again. So it's like here, what we've got is the 7 lower heavens. We've got 3 harmonic universes and 3 parallel harmonic universes, all inside of the density 4, dimension 12 blueprint, which holds the parallel and R blueprint. So the density 4 blueprint is the big one, and then the forms get smaller and smaller and smaller as you go farther out into the densities. So that the 2 really big templates are the biggest manifestation template, dimension 12, and the biggest primal light sound template is dimension 13. So some really interesting things happen right in the middle there. I think we're actually going to skip that one and go on to the next one. So there's what's called a D13 trivecca point and a D12 bivecca point. So this is the 7th lower heaven, dimension 12. We've got the D13, what's called the D13 Manu connection point. Remember, the dimension 13 is the equivalent of the Manu force in the light field. It's the blue flame. And the Manu connection here, the dimension 12 divine blueprint. And they are both Manu, but even though they're both Manu, they essentially form a bipolar phasing unit. And the same with this point. This is like 3 Manu forces phasing together. And the 3rd point is where all 14 of the heavens connect to the cosmic Akasha Manu, God's spirit womb point, right through the very center point. So the more that I looked at this, the more it seemed to me that it's kind of like you can consider that interface between dimension 13 and dimension 12 as like the functional center of all creation, that everything really moves out from that in terms of when you're talking about the time matrices and everything that is manifest. And actually, in terms of the Eka-Veka, that is the point where we connect into the Eka. So it's true structurally in that sense as well. Okay. I just wanted you to have a look at 2 different ways to take a look at the primal light fields. That you could say that they are a phasing triad, and that when you look at it this way, it really looks like these 2 are partially external to the particle. But that really isn't the way that it is, because everything happens within that same particle. So it's more accurate to say that they're internally isolated within the wholeness of the particle unit. And that shows that. And then we have another one of those paradoxical things here, because the light fields are polarized or smaller translations of the ecstatic sound fields. So here we have an ecstatic sound field, and we have the Particoma and the Party-K dimension 13 blueprints, which are polarized, and yet we just saw with that other one that the primal 13 is taken as a single blueprint, and that this is a smaller one inside of that. And the same for these 2. So we get an awful lot of that, big things inside little things. And just to note that every single one of the harmonic universes, plus the tissue capsule of the radial body, form this structure where you have the inner meage field or the ERA form that pulls inward, and the trion manae expands outward, and then around that is a rayon or manu, still point resonant void field. So that's essentially just another way to look at that phasing triad. Now the radial body is really important because it is the levels of the radial body itself that merge to form the flame body. So every single thing that we do with flame body happens in the radial body field. The radial body surrounds the Huva body, and what's called the holographic crystal body, which is another word for the monadic body, manifests in the rayon void field of the radial body. So this is where we're going to get all the crystal body structures. So everything in Cathara 2 and 3 that they're talking about crystal body happens in the rayon field levels. And that's where the dyadic meiotic grid is, where the particum and the particle universes connect with and flow into and through each other. So that field here is extremely important, and this is just a little diagram of the basic crystal body template. When all of these radial bodies merge, all the different levels of the Huva bodies merge, you get an Akasha flame body with an upward pointing shape. That's based on the Eros field. And these are the levels of flame body activation that we get. At the very center here, before we even get to the Eka Amareya flame body, we've got a 30-dimensional Veka flame body that has to be activated before you can expand out into this level. And there's the Akasha flame body, the Akasha A, and the Akasha A Amareya flame bodies. The Veka codes that open the body into those different levels are on this side, the Eka codes, the Scepter codes, the Templar Boucher codes, and the Christ codes. So the radial body and the flame body are the levels that we're opening into. When we open those, we open into the monad. So here we're getting our very first Eros flame activation in Harmonic Universe 1. We've got the densities 1 and 2 flame body, the densities 3 and 4. And in order for the full density 3-4, you have to also activate the parallel density 3-4 to get this full flame body. So you can access the density 5. And you start to get into the Eka flame body activation at density 6, which is here. I just want to mention here that it's a little bit complicated, that we know that we start to connect with the Eka body itself at density 6. But we also know that the Eka, in a certain sense, exists only half a dimensional level above where we are here. So for example, we have Earth, parallel Earth, and inner Earth, which is the Eka Earth. Parallel Earth is one dimension above us in frequency, and inner Earth is half a dimension above us in frequency. It's right in between. So it seems kind of strange that to shall we say, the ECA is as close as half a dimension away from us, why do we have to go all the way up to density level 6 before we can get into the ECA? And it's because it is based on a template that is twice as big as our template here. We have a Particum template, and then there's the Partic template. Together, if you put those together, you're approaching the ECA template size, which is twice as big as us, and which is based on a flame level that is much stronger than our flame level. So even though it starts only half a dimensional step away from us, in order to get there, you have to fully assemble 2 time matrices of consciousness to get into it. So it's like you pull all this up and go all the way up here, and then you kind of drop back down into the actual ECA. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is the ECA-VECA map, and this is the VECA monad. And you will probably notice just by looking at this that the forms of these 2 things are really similar to each other. And what we've got is one triad for each one of the quadrants of the VECA. So you could say each whole 12-tree Pythagora grid of each VECA quadrant, each primal light sound field or each density manifestation field is fueled by a single triad of the monad. You can also say, in a sense, that the way that it works is that the ECA functions like a particide for us and splits itself into Particum and Partic, so that the entire ECA-VECA system is like a single triad at a different level, a bigger one. And that if you're considering that, like this as one single enormous triad, one way to look at that is that its phasing cycle, its rate of phasing, its like time cycle, is going to be much longer or bigger than anything that happens inside. It's like we have lots and lots and lots of time cycles that would happen for one phasing of the ECA-VECA system, building up lots and lots of energy for manifestation before you get one round of the full ECA-VECA. Okay, and this is the Christiak formula for eternal life. So the way that the monad functions is there's 360 degrees of energy potential or thrust that splits itself into 4 quadrants of 90 degrees each. And in the VECA, here's the Particum density field, the Particum primal field, Partic primal field, and the Partic density field. And here's the rayon field, the meage, and actually this is the meage, and this is the trion. And this right here is the Dimension 12 Divine Blueprint Shield. So this is, in a sense, the relative size of the Dimension 12 Divine Blueprint in relative size to the phasing monad that creates it. It's really tiny with regard to that. We're going to see that again when we look at the ECA-VECA clock. So each one of these, that is 90, splits itself into 45, and then another 45 that breaks itself down into 33 1/3 and 11 2/3. And it's the phasing action that creates the eternal life formula. is the form that our monad takes here in the particle universe. So here it is right here. It is based on a Kristalla Pythagoride, and it has two triads in it. This one up here is for the manifestation fields, and this one down here is for the primal fields.